Asylum Inc. presents The Doctor's Findings. Dark current. The Atlantic swells carried secrets older than memory, and Captain Ezra Blackwood knew their weight in his bones. 37 years he had worked these waters off Pemaquid Point, watching the seasons wheel through their ancient dance, while his traps descended into the slate-dark depths. The morning fog hung thick as burial shrouds when he hauled up trap number 43, expecting the usual scrabble of claws against wire mesh. Instead, kelp the color of dried blood wrapped itself around something that should not have existed. The thing pulsed with obscene vitality, each contraction sending ripples through the brine that pooled in his boat's hull. Blackwood's weathered hands trembled as he peeled away the marine vegetation, revealing tissue that gleamed with unnatural health. The organ was impossibly fresh, arterial chambers dilating and contracting with metronomic precision, as if the vast ocean itself served as its circulatory system. When the DNA results came back 3 days later, Detective Chloe Morrow felt reality shift beneath her feet like unstable sediment. The genetic markers belonged to Timothy Ashworth, aged 7, who had drowned during the hurricane of 1932. She stared at the laboratory report until the letters blurred, trying to reconcile the impossible data with the evidence bag containing that still-beating impossibility. The locals spoke in hushed whispers of things that should remain buried beneath the waves. Old Henrik Larsson, whose grandfather had fished these waters before the Great Depression, crossed himself and muttered prayers in Norwegian whenever the subject arose. "The deep keeps its own time," he told anyone who would listen, his roomy eyes reflecting depths that had seen too much. "What goes down doesn't always stay down." As dusk painted the harbour in shades of rust and shadow, the tide began to behave according to laws older than physics. The water level should have dropped with the moon's pull, exposing the barnacle-crusted pilings and revealing the harbour's rocky bottom. Instead, the brine continued to rise, lapping hungrily at dock planks that had never known such caresses. Blackwood watched from his cabin window as the anomalous flood consumed the wharf inch by methodical inch. The other vessels bobbed at their moorings like offerings to some vast, patient deity. His radio crackled with confused chatter from fellow fishermen, their voices growing increasingly panicked as conventional explanations crumbled like sea salt crystals. By midnight, the water had claimed the lower streets of the village. Emergency services arrived to find a phenomenon that defied their training and equipment. The oceanographer from the university spoke of thermoclines and tidal bore effects, but her words carried no conviction. The water continued its inexorable ascent, defying gravity and moon phase calculations alike. Detective Morrow stood at the harbour's edge, listening to sounds that had no earthly source. Beneath the gentle lapping of waves against submerged structures, a rhythm pulsed through the water with supernatural persistence. The beating grew stronger as darkness deepened, resonating through every surface the flood had touched. The boats began to disappear as the first pale fingers of dawn stretched across the horizon. Not sunk or damaged, but simply absent, as if the night had devoured them entirely. The Mary Catherine, the Proud Susan, the Northern Star, all vanished without trace or wreckage. 47 vessels that had ridden at anchor now existed only in the harbour master's logbooks and the increasingly frantic memories of their owners. Blackwood's own boat, the Persistence, had joined the maritime exodus sometime before sunrise. He found only empty water where his livelihood should have been moored, the securing chains hanging loose like discarded shackles. The absence felt personal, as if the sea had reached up with conscious intent to strip away everything that connected him to the surface world. The silence that followed proved more disturbing than any storm. Where waves should have whispered against hulls and rigging should have sung in the breeze, only that infernal beating persisted. The sound seemed to emanate from every submerged surface, turning the harbour into a vast, resonating chamber for something that defied comprehension. Dr. Elizabeth Crane arrived from Woods Hole with instruments designed to measure the impossible. Her hydrophones detected the cardiac rhythm at frequencies that should have dissipated within meters of their source. Instead, the pulse transmitted through water with supernatural clarity, as if the ocean itself had become a conductor for whatever force animated that impossible organ. "The amplitude is increasing," she told the assembled officials, her scientific composure cracking like ice under pressure. "Whatever is generating this signal, it's getting stronger." Local children began to gather at the water's edge, despite their parents' frantic attempts to keep them indoors. They stood in silent rows, their eyes reflecting depths that children should never possess. When questioned, they spoke of songs only they could hear, melodies that called from the drowned places where light never penetrated. Old Henrik Larsson was found at dawn on the fourth day, standing waist-deep in the floodwaters, with his arms raised toward the lightening sky. His lips moved in supplications to powers that predated human settlement of these shores. When rescue workers pulled him from the brine, he babbled about the sleepers below and the debt that comes due. The beating grew louder. Detective Morrow felt it in her chest now, a secondary rhythm that synchronized with her own heartbeat until she could no longer distinguish between the two. Sleep became impossible as the sound penetrated every structure in the flooded zone. Windows vibrated in their frames, and the foundations of buildings began to resonate with sympathetic frequencies. Marine biologists arrived with theories about bioluminescent jellyfish and deep water adaptations, but their explanations withered under scrutiny. No known creature could generate the persistent, coordinated pulse that now dominated the harbor. Sonar readings revealed only empty water where the sound should have originated, as if the source existed in some dimension perpendicular to normal space. The children's drawings became increasingly disturbing. Crayon sketches depicted vast shapes moving beneath stylized waves, forms that suggested intelligence without revealing specific anatomy. Their teacher, Mrs. Adelaide Corwin, noticed that each drawing contained the same central element, a pulsing red shape that resembled nothing so much as an oversized human heart. As the second week began, residents reported dreams of impossible depths and cities that had never seen sunlight. The visions carried a weight of memory that felt older than human consciousness, as if something vast and patient had begun to stir in response to that beating summons from the surface world. The water began to recede on the 15th day, leaving behind deposits that marine geologists could not classify. The sediment contained traces of metals that existed nowhere in Earth's periodic table, arranged in crystalline patterns that hurt the mind to contemplate. Buildings emerged from the flood, bearing stains that resembled nothing so much as arterial networks, dark traceries that pulsed with their own internal light. But the boats never returned. The harbor remained empty, its silence broken only by that eternal beating, which now seemed to emanate from the bedrock itself. Fishermen from neighboring ports reported strange currents that pulled their vessels toward Pemaquid Point with irresistible force. Those who ventured too close spoke of shadows moving beneath their hulls, shapes too large and too purposeful to be natural. Captain Ezra Blackwood sold his house and moved inland, but distance provided no escape from the dreams. In his sleep, he descended through fathoms of black water toward a place where the beating heart of a child who died in 1932 had become the herald of something far more ancient and infinitely more patient. The forensics lab sealed the heart in a containment unit designed for hazardous materials, but the beating continued unabated. Night shift technicians reported that the sound grew louder during the dark hours, as if whatever animated the organ drew strength from the absence of light. Detective Morrow transferred to a precinct in Portland, then Augusta, then as far inland as her career would allow. But geography offered no refuge from the knowledge that some things rise from depths that geography cannot measure. In the small hours before dawn, she would wake to the phantom sensation of that rhythmic pulsing, echoing through her bones like a promise or a threat. The harbour at Pemaquid Point remains empty to this day, its waters reflecting only sky and the occasional gull. But on certain nights, when the moon is dark and the tide runs against its natural course, those brave or foolish enough to listen closely can still hear the beating from below. It calls to something that sleeps in the deepest trenches of the ocean, something that measures time in geological epochs and remembers when the continents wore different shapes. The children who heard the songs have grown into adults who speak in whispers of the debt that waits beneath the waves. They know, with certainty that transcends rational thought, that the empty harbour serves as more than a memorial to the vanished fleet. It is a listening post, a resonating chamber where the pulse of that impossible heart counts down toward a reckoning that began when the first boats failed to return. In the depths, where pressure would crush human bodies like empty shells, 47 vessels rest in perfect formation around something that was never quite a ship. Their hulls have become part of a vast organic architecture, a circulatory system that spans the ocean floor and pulses with the rhythm of that beating heart from 1932. And in the deepest part of that impossible structure, Timothy Ashworth opens eyes that have learned to see in absolute darkness, his 7-year-old form preserved in brine that tastes of copper and eternity. He counts the beats that echo through the water, patient as only the drowned can be patient, waiting for the day when the tide rises high enough to reclaim the land that forgot its debts to the sea. Ah, my dear aficionados of aquatic anxiety, gather close as we reflect upon tonight's maritime meditation. You witnessed Captain Blackwood's routine lobster trap yield not crustacean, but the still beating heart of young Liam Ashworth, a child who drowned in 1932, yet whose cardiac organ pulsed with supernatural vitality in the present day. You observed this impossible relic broadcast its rhythm through the harbour waters as the tide defied natural law, rising to swallow boats, buildings, and ultimately 47 vessels that vanished into depths where the drowned boy waited with oceanic patience. The flooded town became a resonating chamber for something ancient and vast, responding to the child's cardiac beacon from the abyss where maritime debts accumulate interest across the decades. Funny that we landlubbers speak of drowning in debt, never suspecting that the ocean keeps such meticulous ledgers of its own. Until next time, my treasured students of the macabre, if you found yourself stirred, unsettled, or just a bit more wary of shadows, consider offering a like to feed the entity that powers these tales. And should you subscribe, you may yet survive to hear the next whisper from the void.